A person's true worth is not measured by what they have, but by what they choose to give. Yet most people go through life believing the opposite, thinking that until they have money, success, or recognition, they have nothing of value to offer. But what if that belief is the very thing holding them back? What if the moment you stop focusing on what you lack and start using what you already have is the moment everything begins to change? Today's story reveals how one simple shift in thinking can transform an ordinary life into something extraordinary. And if you stay until the end, you might begin to see yourself in a completely different way. Once in a crowded city filled with noise, movement, and endless distractions, there lived a beggar who sat on the same street corner every single day. From morning until night, he stretched out his hand, asking strangers for money. Some people ignored him as if he didn't exist. Some dropped a few coins without making eye contact.
And others looked at him with pity before walking away. To most people, he was invisible, just another face in the background of a busy world. And over time, he began to believe that this was all he would ever be. Someone who depended entirely on the kindness of others. Someone who had nothing to give and nothing to offer except an open hand. But one afternoon, something unusual happened. As he sat quietly watching the crowd pass by, he overheard a conversation between two men standing nearby. One of them looked frustrated and exhausted as he said, "I don't understand. No matter how hard I try, nothing in my life seems to improve. I feel stuck." The beggar listened carefully. Something about those words caught his attention. For a moment, he forgot about his own struggles and focused entirely on what the man was saying. And without fully thinking it through, he did something he had never done before. Instead of asking for money, he spoke. "Maybe," he said softly, "you're focusing too much on what you don't have and not enough on what you can do." The two men turned toward him in surprise, clearly not expecting advice from someone in his position. One of them raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you giving us advice?" The beggar hesitated for a second, then nodded. "I may not have money," he said, "but I still have thoughts." There was a brief moment of silence, and then something unexpected happened. The frustrated man reached into his pocket, pulled out some money, and handed it to the beggar. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I needed to hear that." The beggar was stunned. For the first time in his life, he had not received money out of pity, but in exchange for something he had given. Something small, something simple, but something meaningful. That moment stayed with him long after the men had walked away. That night, as he lay on the cold ground trying to sleep, his mind kept returning to the same thought. What if I don't have to beg? What if I have something to offer? What if I've been wrong about myself all along?
The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. Instead of sitting with his hand stretched out, silently waiting for coins, he sat upright and began to observe the people around him more carefully. He noticed their expressions, their body language, the way some looked worried, stressed, or lost in thought. And whenever he sensed that someone might be struggling, he spoke to them, offering a simple piece of advice, a kind word, or a different perspective. At first, most people ignored him. Some laughed, and others found it strange. But a few stopped to listen, and those few almost always gave him something in return. As the days passed, something remarkable began to happen. More people started recognizing him, not as a beggar, but as someone who had something to say. "You're the man who gives good advice," they would say. And slowly, without even realizing it, his identity began to change. He was no longer just someone who asked. He had become someone who gave. And that changed everything. Weeks turned into months, and the number of people who came to him grew. Some came with questions, others came just to listen, and many left not only with a new perspective, but also with a desire to give something back. One day, a young man approached him and said, "Your words have helped me more than you can imagine. Would you come speak to a small group of people I work with?" The former beggar was shocked. No one had ever asked him for something like that before. But the young man smiled and said, "That's because you stopped asking and started giving." That invitation marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life.
Months later, the same street looked very different. The man who once sat on the ground with his hand outstretched now stood confidently, dressed neatly, speaking to groups of people who listened with respect and attention. He was no longer begging, he was teaching, and people were paying, not because they felt sorry for him, but because they saw value in what he offered. One evening, as he walked past the corner where he used to sit, he paused and looked at the empty spot. A quiet smile formed on his face as he whispered to himself, "I was never truly poor. I just didn't realize what I had to give." And that is the truth most people never discover. Life does not change when you simply wait for things to happen. It changes when you decide to become someone who creates value. If you believe you have nothing, you will continue to have nothing. The moment you recognize even the smallest thing you can offer, your thoughts, your skills, your effort, your kindness, your perspective, you step into a completely different reality. Because in the end, the world does not respond to what you need. It responds to what you give. And the moment you shift from asking to offering, from lacking to creating, from waiting to acting, you stop being dependent on others and start becoming valuable in your own right. And sometimes, the most powerful transformation begins not with gaining something new, but with finally seeing the worth of what has been within you all along. Every week, we put out stories like this, the kind that make you think a little differently about how you're moving through life. If that sounds like something you want more of, you already know what to do. Until next time.
One evening, as he walked past the corner where he used to sit, he paused and looked at the empty spot. A quiet smile formed on his face as he whispered to himself, "I was never truly poor. I just didn't realize what I had to give." And that is the truth most people never discover. Life does not change when you simply wait for things to happen. It changes when you decide to become someone who creates value. If you believe you have nothing, you will continue to have nothing. But the moment you recognize even the smallest thing you can offer, your thoughts, your skills, your effort, your kindness, your perspective, you step into a completely different reality. Because in the end, the world does not respond to what you need. It responds to what you give. And the moment you shift from asking to offering, from lacking to creating, from waiting to acting, you stop being dependent on others and start becoming valuable in your own right. And sometimes the most powerful transformation begins not with gaining something new, but with finally seeing the worth of what has been within you all along.